Right, so what I thought we'd do, just to break the ice a little bit, is to introduce the panel members and get them to say a little bit about what first got them into IPv6. Just a brief few sentences, be very good. If you could tell us who you are and where you're from.
Hello, my name is Nick Heatley. I currently are at BT, and I started the IPv6 journey when I was in EE, so the mobile operator, obviously bought by BT. So back in 2012, started looking at the feasibility of pushing out IPv6 on the mobile network, but it really got going in 2014, I'd say. And we pushed it out and started to see big usage in 2015. We used 464 XLAT then. We were following T-Mobile in the US, which were a trailblazer on XLAT deployment, and we got Android working and then moved on to Apple devices, and yeah, the rest is history. So
cool. Let's move it along to Nick.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nick Chettle. I'm currently at Meta, but I started my IPv6 journey at Sky here in the UK. So about 11 years ago, we were working on a large-scale IPv6 deployment. I think probably one of the first for the major service providers in this country. This was a dual-stack deployment. There was a lot of work that went into that from a lot of people in this room, actually. There's a big focus on CPE development and, the BNG infrastructure, peering, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a fairly large effort, but, I think the results were worth it. We managed to get to sort of 60, 70, 80%, like reasonably quickly within a sort of 1 year time frame. Since then I've been involved in the community ever since.
Thank you. So Veronika McKillop. I started with IPv6, I think, in like 2008 or something like that. At the time, I was systems engineer in Cisco in the Czech Republic, and my customers were higher education institutions. And universities, they like to tinker. Also, the Czech version of Janet was using IPv6. I think they deployed it first at the end of the year 2000 on some software routers, and then moved to hardware. So I was the youngest engineer in the team. My colleagues told me that you can't teach all dogs new tricks, so it was up to me to pick up IPv6. Well, I think that was a good thing, because then 2 years later I moved here to the UK and started working with our customers, and basically been with IPv6 since then.
Hi, Tim Chown, Jisc. I first came across V6 27 years ago. It's really depressing. A student came to me while I was at the University of Southampton to do a project, and this new V6 thing. He discovered this obscure BSD implementation of a very early spec of V6, and we started from there. We got the UK's first wide area V6 link, a 64 kilobit link to UUNet in London, and then went on through talking to other universities in the R&E, research and education sector, to start pushing for V6 there, pushing on the educational side, the research side, did work with a bunch of other national research networks in around 2002, 2003, got all the R&E networks, their backbones dual stacked by about 20 years ago. And the sad thing is the number of universities that have deployed since then is very minimal. We've had some great stuff from David Stockdale today about what Imperial have done, and they're really impressive stuff taking up the V6, mostly work that Jen has led. But in general, the number of universities that have deployed is about 10%. So my mission now is to try and find the drivers and the right persuasion for the universities to deploy. So the more of that, the better. The people coming out of the universities are the future. They're the graduates, the computer science professionals, etc. We should be making sure they know about this thing.
Okay, so obviously this panel is about the 10th anniversary of the UK IPv6 Council being a thing, which we're all very proud of, I think, in particular. But I wanted to start the queries to the panel with a very open question, I think. How did you feel when first asked to join or form the UK IPv6 Council?
Because I'm the main culprit, I'm going to start, right? So some people know the story, but most of you probably don't. V6 World Congress in Paris, 2014. Latif Ladid, he's the president of IPv6 Forum, and now late Professor Peter Gerstein from UCL. Literally, they cornered me because they heard that I was doing some IPv6 work in Cisco with the customers, and these guys came to me and say, UK is doing nothing about IPv6, you know, it's horrible. France at the time, thanks to Free and 6RD, were at 5%. Everybody was admiring them, right? Globally, we were at 0.6, in UK 0.19. And Latif said, you have to change this. You have to start doing something. And I was just like, how do I do this? And so I was pretty shocked, skeptical, but I have learned in my engineering career, just like, you know, just get on with stuff. And because I was working with Sky at the time, I already knew, thanks to Nick, Rich, Ian, who was in Sky as well at the time, that things were going to change. So I said, well, there is hope, and let's see what we can do.
Anyone else with feelings? We've had cornered so far.
Cornered. So I'll start with a different one then. So I was quite excited. So, you know, as Veronika just mentioned, you know, at the time there were very few deployments in the UK. You know, we'd already been working on a deployment at Sky for the last, you know, I think about a year at that point. So, you know, we had a pretty good view of what was going to happen. You know, at the time, Sky were, and I'm not sure where they are now, but at the time, Sky were the second largest provider in the country. So, you know, we could see that we were going to move the needle a bit when we made this deployment. So, you know, we had a positive story to share, and it was exciting to be able to share that with folks and, you know, and kind of learn more about what they were doing.
Any more feelings? Would you have a slight follow-up question here, which is,
go on.
in addition to, you know, how did you feel when we started, how do you feel the council has been successful since starting as well?
I think what we've been really good at is getting together 2, 3, 4 times a year, obviously the big meeting annually, and then the other sort of workshops and roundtables, bringing like-minded people together to talk through what they were doing, what worked, how they were being successful, what the lessons they'd learned. That was what was really great about it, people that wanted to work together. Obviously, there's some competition between some of the people in the room, but equally they wanted to share information to move forward as a whole. And as someone just said, I think it was Veronika, we were at less than 1% in the UK when this started 10 years ago, and now we're over 40% somewhere. So over 50 now. Oh, gosh.
Almost 50.
Okay, almost 50. So I think it's been very successful, and I think it's been a great feeling to be working together with people that are moving towards a common objective. It's great.
So I felt pretty inspired as well because, you know, when you're presented with a real challenge like deploying IPv6, you know, it sometimes can be quite isolating when you're not kind of sharing that problem. So I think what the council has been really good at is a shared vision. You know, so we all share that vision, but it's also nearly lost the laptop then. It's also about, you know, kind of the collaboration. So I've been working a lot in open source and cloud recently, and I think that community's very good at showing how you can work together, that you can kind of leave affiliations at the door, you can kind of bring people together, and as engineers, finding a kind of a safe space to discuss technology and discuss deployment is brilliant, and that's really what the council's been excellent at doing. So yeah, that's my take from it.
What do I have to press to get the screen back up on there? Yeah, come on, give me a hand. Sorry, I disrupted something when I tried to save the laptop. Cool. So I guess there was a mixed array of feelings there, but presumably there's some satisfaction with what we've achieved in the last 10 years, I feel. And that's quite interesting to know. So building on that a little bit, in the last 10 years, what has surprised you in terms of either local IPv6 deployments here in the UK or potentially global IPv6 deployments? What has been surprising to you the most that you wouldn't have guessed had happened?
Should I carry on? I think what's been surprising to me is the fact that we haven't seen as much customer disruption as potentially we kind of anticipated, and I think that's because generally as engineers we found ways to skip those and bypass those. But I think there's definitely a cost argument to deploying V6. And that's even truer now, because the other thing I'd say that's really surprising is how much IPv4 costs. And if you think about large-scale operations, buying into IPv4 at scale is pretty damn expensive now. So.
Thanks. One thing that I would say surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't looking back on it, but seeing CGNAT in fixed line providers. 10 years ago, I didn't think we'd be seeing that. But as Nick was just sort of getting to, like it probably shouldn't have been a surprise, right? Like public v4 addressing is a finite resource, it's got a value, and then when you put that cost into a deployment where it's necessary, of course you're going to see some kind of, something's got to give. You've either got to find that money or find different ways of working around it. So yeah, I would say just how common sort of CGNAT deployments became was a bit of a surprise.
So for me, slightly different view, and that term has been used here many times today. I'm really surprised how quickly IPv6 mostly took off. If you think about all the different transition technologies that we have come up over the last 20 years, how to get us to IPv6, this, in my opinion, has been the fastest growing and the most successful, because it kind of still keeps going, the IPv4, which we can't get rid of completely, but it solves the problem of running out of v4 to a degree, because there is less requests from the end devices. So I would say that considering, I think the standard is like 5 years ago, something like this. Not even, right? So
no.
This is very impressive, and I think that's something that really surprised me over the last 10 years the most.
I'd just echo what Veronika's just said. I think one of the great things in the last 2 or 3 years has been, we've always been thinking of deploying V6, going dual stack, without necessarily about the end game, which has to be IPv6 only. I don't think any of us are naive enough to believe that v4 will ever even maybe completely go away, but go away soon. But this now has given us a great way to deploy in a means which allows you to go V6 only where you can, and for the other devices, continue with a bit of V4. And I think that's been fantastic. And people are now thinking a lot more about where they can turn off V4 and not just continue in dual stack. So I think that's been really, really good. I think the surprising thing for me, in a disappointing way, being from the research and education sector and having been at a university and now at the organisation that connects universities, we've got V6 in the backbones, it's all there for the universities to use, but aside from some of the research communities, like the CERN experiments, the deployment in the universities has been surprisingly low. I would have thought they would want to deploy it, at least in computer science, electronics and so on, for teaching and research, but some work Graham did recently just showed that the percentage of universities that do that is remarkably small. So we need to think of ways of encouraging that.
So your previous point, actually, about none of us are naive to think about it, actually is a great segue into the next question that I've got written down here. No, it's great. You set it up perfectly. So to the panel in general, does it matter if some percentage of the internet remains on IPv4? Will the council have failed in their objectives if this happens?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think some proportion of the internet staying on IPv4 is probably inevitable. I don't think it's gonna. I don't think we're ever going to get to v6 only. I think. I think it's all like trade-offs that application providers or service providers kind of have to make, because there are benefits to being on v6 only. We talked about CGNAT before. There are other sort of performance benefits. So does it matter? No, probably not. But I think it would be a lot better, for most people if they can accelerate some of these deployments.
I would just concur with Nick, because we know, for example, how long did it take for ISPs to remove ATM, right? To replace with MPLS, and now we are moving forward. So I think, v4 is going to be there for foreseeable future. We will need some external pressure from governments, vendors, to actually, who say they are not going to support v4 anymore in their products, maybe one day in the future. But this is not task just of this council, because internet is a global entity. Everybody has their responsibility to do their bit. But as long as we can kind of cope with it, and we can make most of the content v6 available and access, and also v6 democratize access to broadband, right? If you look at where broadband is available today, it's more like the northern hemisphere. But if you look, on the southern, the access to the internet is pretty poor. So hopefully, with infinite v6 resources, this is going to improve for the other part of the world too.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think there's a cost, obviously, to being, when you say removing v4, that means you're dual stack, essentially. There's a cost to being dual stack. There's operating, if you're on the backbone, you've got big fat routers with big fat routing tables that ideally you would just have one protocol of routing information in there. And there's the whole troubleshooting and diagnostic side of thing. If you're managing two protocols, it's a lot more complicated. So I think this comes back to a lot more people now who have gone dual stack thinking about how they can remove v4 to simplify the operation and the cost of running their networks. And I think if you can do that, great. If you don't want to do that, you're just going to be spending more. I suppose the question is, if so many people keep running v4, don't want to move, what's the cost on others of them doing that and their costs? So the big ISPs and the providers having to continue to operate and run it because they need those customers. Where's the onus there to have a change?
Well, there's a kind of an interesting kind of follow-on point from that, is that are we in danger of creating a two-tier internet in some fashion?
I don't know whether that's the right place to focus, because I just feel like in all of this, it's been like, as an analogy, the Tour de France, in a peloton. We're all moving forward. You've got to stay with the peloton. Some people are at the front working hard. Some people are at the back, but just don't fall off the back. And so as long as we're moving forward and making gains on the road, it doesn't feel like we need to worry too much about these almost purist end games. We just need to keep moving.
Community spirit.
Yeah, I think so. And it's like, well, should we have it on the internet? Well, we have a collection of different industries, different user groups, different communities, and sometimes the internet just means a set of protocols that connects all of those things. So, I think I go with the user group feel rather than there might not be one single answer here.
Okay, so let's move on to another question. Slightly different topic, very slightly, but similarly, from a similar vein. How have you found, or how have you experienced CGNAT as an effect on IPv6 deployments? Has it been a beneficial technology, or has it been a detrimental technology?
For me, it's been excellent. But it's because it's part of 464XLAT, so it got us to kind of IPv6 only networking. So if out of CGNAT came NAT64, so yeah. But if you mean the other flavor, then someone else can answer.
Well, yes. I mean, are there any other volunteers to take a moment on that? You don't have to. I'll let you off.
Well, we had a little pre-discussion before this panel, and there are two sides to it, right? My opinion is very regionalized, and our view is very regionalized because here in the UK we have not really experienced it at a great scale, right? Our service providers have deployed dual stack in order to send as much V6 traffic, freely, while some of it gets translated. They need, of course, for altnets who are newcomers to the market, they basically have no other choice. And I don't think the user experience so far has been really poorly. But then you move regions and you go to Asia Pac. And there it's layers and layers and layers of CGNAT, and the user experience on V4 is absolutely horrible. However, at the same time, the culture there is different. So, and those countries are not terribly wealthy, not all of them. So they rely on cheaper technologies, which might not have the same V6 support. So, in my opinion, yeah, in some way CGNAT helped them there, but at the same time kind of stopped them from deploying IPv6 because they are just duct taping and keeping the lights on, and also it's difficult for them to upgrade to deploy for IPv6. So I think there are two sides to it. It's a useful tool and necessary in some way on our way to transition to IPv6, but I would say it has delayed it. If we didn't have this option, we maybe would have gone faster.
Yeah, I remember we had a CGNAT panel like this one 2 years ago. Thanks, Veronika. And yeah, one of the people on the panel there was a chap from an ISP that operates where I live in Southampton, Tube, and it was causing them real problems. So they're very good with V6, a gigabit up and down to the home, but they were getting a lot of problems from having to run CGNAT because they're a new ISP. And I think if you want to see the continued evolution of our industry in the ISP space, you need to be able to have new ISPs coming and not be encumbered like that. So I think that's another example of where's the cost and who's paying for this. So the ISP has to have the complexity of CGNAT because not enough content providers make V6 available natively for the things they're providing. So I think the more that we encourage provision of V6 by the content providers, the less the need for V4 and therefore CGNAT. That has to be a good thing. In the RNE space, universities, we don't have any CGNAT at all. The universities, a lot of them have a lot of legacy V4 space that I've forgotten, is the broker still in the room, that they'll probably be trying to buy. There may be someone in the room with more than 1/16 of V4 address space from a university. But no, we don't have to deal with it. But I mean, NAT in itself has obviously delayed the introduction of V6. But thankfully, we don't have to deal with CGNAT in universities because we're not essentially that type of operation.
Yeah, like I totally understand the perspective on the smaller ISPs. I think one thing I personally witnessed CGNAT do is I think it's actually I think it's made a very clear business case for IPv6 deployment, right? So in big service providers, it becomes a lot easier when you can put sort of an actual cost to continuing to do V4 only. So, when we can see that, 40% of this traffic could be moved away from a CGNAT box if we just, disabled IPv6. Sorry, don't disable IPv6.
It's today's best Freudian slip.
If we just, rolled out IPv6 there. So, on that side, like in some ways, it's actually, I think, driven deployments of IPv6. On the other hand, on the content providers side, I think even for content providers, I think CGNAT has actually provided a fairly good argument for making content available via V6, to avoid like having to go through these CGNAT boxes to get like a cleaner path. Like if we've got operators running networks with CGNAT boxes that are perhaps congested or busy or just, generally adding extra hops, in the process, being able to get that being able to avoid that and for content providers to deliver that content directly to the user is, that's a pretty compelling case too.
Grand. So we're going to move on to something, again, just a touch different, but certainly related. Common misconceptions, quite rife. We've had a few of those espoused today, and we're no strangers to any of these. And I do feel like I know I've certainly tried to contribute to the council's events in a way that tries to dispel some myths and various other things. But which are the common misconceptions, that you feel have persisted for the last 10 years and continue to do so? Which are the ones that we haven't yet dispelled? Anyone think of any examples of those?
But so in general, the IPv6 is not used or not being deployed, right? That's the first when you talk to large enterprises, the VPs, managers, blah, blah, blah. That's why I showed you all those statistics, so you can go and confront them with it and say, UK is at 50%. How are we making our services available over this better protocol, right? Over IPv6 for our customers. But yeah, that's something that I have seen and endlessly debated. Nick?
I've heard that one too many times, unfortunately.
So I think the one that's persisted and still remains is that kind of, NAT obscurity, security through obscurity. And, we've just got to get rid of that and get past that. So it's annoying.
No phishing email ever cared about a NAT gateway.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And sort of the other one, which is possibly more my opinion, shoot me down, but I kind of feel like the global unicast addresses, ULAs. If you're in that debate, if you're having that engineering discussion about which to use, global unicast. Just use global unicast. If you're forced to use ULA because
I'm so glad we got that on video.
Yeah. So I don't know whether everyone agrees with me, but yeah, that's my feeling and analogy. It's like global unicast is like a pair of underpants. You kind of don't want to show everyone them, but you if there's a knock at the door, you're glad you're wearing it. And so put on your global unicast. Yeah. I'm just trying out new material.
So Veronika was advertising IPv6 Council T-shirt at the start. Are you promoting a V6 Council underpants? That's the next thing.
Moving right along then.
Moving swiftly along.
Take the mic away.
Misconception. It's a really good question. I think when 20 plus years ago, people were trying to make people aware of V6. There are a lot of things being said then that simply aren't true, like V6 is more secure, V6 gives you better quality of service, etc., etc. I think it is essentially just another IP. There are obviously differences, but I think a lot of people are a little nervous and scared of deploying it, particularly in enterprises, because of some of the things they might have heard. But yeah, it's tricky.
Are you kind of referring to this suggestion that it's hard, that it's difficult in some fashion? And I know I'm not on the panel. I'm supposed to be moderating the panel, but one of my hardest problems to ever describe and deal with is this is not actually that difficult. You just have to put some time in. Just put some time in, as you would any other new technology that you've ever got to learn. And it frustrates me that this is an impassable labyrinth of things, all hexadecimal in shape.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, two things I would say that I've seen persist throughout the last 10 years, and I think both of them actually have been hit upon already today. One is this whole idea that, maybe I'm promoting it too, but the disable IPv6, is the solution to everything. So I think there are still too many sort of troubleshooting guides that are, perhaps taking the easy way out, saying, just disable it, that will make things easy. And that's kind of sad because, you're missing out on a lot of the benefits that you could get by doing this properly. The other one, I would say, and maybe a less common one, is when it comes to IP address planning. People a lot of the time are sort of set in their ways of creating IP address plans as if this were IPv4. And there was an excellent talk just prior to this panel. Discussing how you can actually embrace IPv6 and some of the benefits you can get from it. So I would sort of encourage more folks to really take their time with IPv6 address planning and think about how they can kind of lean into it.
Okay, so we've got 9 minutes left or so, and I want to take you into the final question, which is a bit of a twofer. I'm getting attacked by a wire. A bit of a twofer. UK IPv6 adoption, so let's constrain ourselves to the United Kingdom for this because it is a big question. Is the UK IPv6 adoption where you expected it to be today, 10 years ago? And how quickly do you think it will grow from where it is now?
I think you should start.
It's like I've got this glass bowl, right, to look into the future.
Peer away, please. Yes.
Well, when I started with the council, I thought okay, not that we would be done in 3 years, but maybe in 3 years we wouldn't have anything to talk about, right? But at the same time, I knew that wouldn't be the case. So I would say not. I would have expected our level of deployment to be over 50%. Like look at France, they're 75%. Look at Germany, and they are as advanced economies as the UK. So, but from the signals that I've been getting today from the room, I think there will be some significant growth in foreseeable future, and really looking forward to seeing our number going up,
Yeah, I think we have every reason to be optimistic. If you look at, there's various measurements of V6 deployment, and they're all still very much up and to the right. They're not flattening off or, heaven forbid, dropping. So I think we should have every confidence that's going to continue to be the case. We've heard from other ISPs who are in the process of deploying and putting things out, content providers who are going to do that. So yeah, I think the other thing at the moment is, if you look at where the UK is percentage-wise, we're pretty much on the world average as well. So we're not doing brilliantly, but we're not doing badly. But
that's the British way.
It's the British way. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. I think I agree largely with Veronika here. Actually, that we're a little bit sort of lower than I would say I was expecting. 10 years ago, I probably imagined that we'd be above 50, or quite clearly above 50%. But it's encouraging to see how we are moving in the. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think the community is very active. These meetings are always incredibly well attended. There's always lots of interesting talks, lots of great collaboration. So I think we're kind of moving in the right direction. But yeah, I would have hoped it would have been a little bit faster.
I totally agree, Nick. It's great to see so many people out there and interested, but I guess it's kind of expected that across enterprises generally it's still difficult to justify doing a load of work just to kind of stand still, and we need to find ways of making it more trivial, should we say, to deploy. And I'm hoping that IPv6 mostly is a good way into that. I suppose it's disappointing that not all ISPs are covered, and that's surprising, really, at this to where we are. But hey,
sure. How do you feel about the economics at the moment of IPv6 deployment? Is this to the panel in general? How do you feel that is changing? Is there a sort of a logarithmic curve here, some sort of exponential graph that we're expecting, or something linear?
Well, I would just say that's the advantage of being kind of a little bit later to the game, with the majority, not the early adopter. I think now it's in a way cheaper in terms of effort to deploy IPv6 because the vendor support has advanced so much over the last 10 years, even though, of course, we always have to check for the feature parity that is there, that's really working. You always have to test and everything. But I would say when it comes to implementation, it is getting easier, and I think that could contribute to okay, it's cheaper. The economics is better now of deploying IPv6. It was worth waiting, but sometimes people will need to do it in a hurry, for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think people have probably seen it in the news of late. Universities and colleges, they are pressed financially, and they have lots of things they need to do. If you speak to any leader of a HE or FE IT enterprise, they will put security way ahead as the number one thing they're concerned about. All the ransomware attacks, everything else that happens that can be very detrimental. V6 is always bubbling there, something they're aware of that they ought to do at some point, but it's sort of bubbling underneath the other priorities. So it is very difficult. And I think the one thing we can do to help is obviously have great leadership examples, like David has painted a great picture today of the V6 mostly deployment, but to make it as simple as possible to deploy V6 as an enterprise. There's been a lot of different approaches. We saw from one of the very early talks, I think it was Tommy at Microsoft, all these different transition technologies, blah, blah, blah. Over the years, it's looked very complicated because there's all these options. I think the way to simplify it is just to say, push this V6 mostly approach for enterprise, get together as a community and just be very positive about that as a simple, cost-effective way of deploying V6 in an enterprise. As Nick says, it is one of the hardest areas to argue a case. In a university, it should be there for teaching and research. It's not just about functional computing, if you like. There's more to it than that. But yeah, simplify it as much as possible, and hopefully the economics will be more favourable.
Sure. So I think we've got about 4 minutes left or so. Just 3 minutes left. Did you want to do some closing remarks or take some questions?
Questions?
So, if anyone has a question, you'll have to shout it out and I will repeat it for the benefit of the recording. But if you have the mic will have to come back for them to answer. So, thank you for offering that. So, if anyone has a question for the panel that you'd like to field, you can pick on someone individually if you like. Maybe, based on something they've said already today. There we have a volunteer. If you can stand and enunciate it.
So people may know that I work in the public sector doing the particle physics experiments at CERN. And one of the things we are concentrating on and being forced to concentrate on is energy efficiency, net zero, carbon footprint. We're looking at compute, we're looking at storage. Networking is an important thing. I think there's a trick we're missing at the moment. IPv6 routing is much more efficient. Energy efficient. But the fact that we don't have to do NAS, the fixed header sizes. I've seen figures that state that just using IPv6 networking could be 30% less energy.
So I'll just repeat that for the.
Something this should be doing as a way of persuading people, persuading the UK universities they should allow Janet to go to IPv6.
So I'll repeat that for the benefit of the recording. Stop me if I surmise this incorrectly. Gentleman works at CERN, and he thinks we're missing a trick here by not concentrating on the efficiencies, the energy efficiencies of IPv6 networking, fixed headers and the like. And the panel free, I think, to answer that as they wish.
Yeah, I can have a go at that. So, when we were talking about CGNAT earlier, and we were talking, that there is a business case to be made. You can quite clearly see the capex, the opex that it's going to cost to run this infrastructure. It's relatively easy to figure out how much traffic could we offload from this path. So, I think this argument absolutely stacks up, because I think you could do the same thing from an energy consumption perspective. There's no reason we couldn't. That a case couldn't be made for the particular use case as to, what are the energy implications of doing this. So, yeah, I think that's a completely valid path.
I'd just add to that, is anyone aware of or have done any measurements on the energy efficiency of IPv6?
So David, he mentioned it.
He had done so?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
You did some measurements. Or you have seen some measurements, David, no?
Well, I've seen reference to it.
Okay. Maybe it's an opportunity for a research project for somebody? Research paper?
2025 workshop.
So what I'm hearing is there's a PhD student here somewhere that hopefully is listening. Maybe Sourcine, actually.
BT just released a white paper about energy efficient approaches within the whole of our business, and I'd suggest having a read of that as well if that's an area that interests you. But I think it is different orders of magnitude. So what we're doing is turning off our radio networks in quiet periods to save a lot of power. And generally turning things off, turning things down is far, far more important than changing kind of protocols, in all honesty. So if you haven't done that, if you've got banks of cloud servers and you're not putting power saving profiles on them, and if you're not turning off things that are not in use, that is the low-hanging fruit. But it's a really interesting aspect to taking this forward and looking at core networks. But yeah, the paper goes into it, but there's a lot of difference between, kind of the use of ASICs, use of CPU, kind of different edge and core technologies, and there's kind of different approaches there. But it's really interesting to think about the protocol itself and what difference that may make and the apparatus around it. So
we're hitting time. Did you want to say some closing remarks for us?
Yes, I just want to end on a positive note, So 10 years of the council, and guys, we are first to receive this Excellence Award.
Hey!
So this is a little celebration for us of the people who contributed to the growth of IPv6 traffic in the UK, to the adoption, deployments, who have done endless hours of debugging, and then dealing with vendors. I want to say great 10 years. Hopefully, maybe in 5 years we can wrap up. That would be nice. But we can keep it going, and we keep going in the Finch SPUP. Okay, I think that's the most important information for Tim. He keeps always asking me about it.
I think that it's always nice to get an award. I'm just trying to see who that is on the...
It's Jim Bound.
Oh, it's Jim. Oh, right. Okay, so it's too time to see. Yeah, I mean, I do miss Jim Bound. He was, for those that don't know, Jim Bound was worked at a number of companies, mainly HP in the US, and he was one of the big people that were driving interest in V6 around the turn of the century. I said we just started up something at the University of Southampton. He made a very generous donation of some of the HP equipment, shipped it over from the US to us for our lab. Fantastic guy, very enthusiastic in the ITF and the DHC working group. Just a tremendous man. It was very sad that he died before his time, really. But great that we're honouring him with the awards that we give to people, and that Latif has done that with the award for us. And we can think of Jim a bit when we're in the pub and celebrating in the pub.
On that note, let's not stand on ceremony and get to the pub shortly. But if not before, can we have a round of applause for our panellists?